Thanksgiving is over, which means we're safe to talk politics again, right? No? Okay, well, that's too late. This morning, we were talking about laws concerning voting rights and the way they're being legislated in the courts right now.
Of course, our 9 News legal analyst, Whitney Traylor, with us to break it all down. So before we get into the actual cases, what legal issues is the Voting Rights Act facing?
Yeah, so the Voting Rights Act is legislation that was passed in 1965 to really protect the black vote related to the 14th and 15th Amendment. But what you've been seeing now is kind of this fight between the states and the federal government, because the states are saying, let us run our elections the way we want to do it. But what you're seeing now is what we call gerrymandering. So you have it political and racial gerrymandering. So that's where they carve the congressional districts, the legislature, in a way that like in Arkansas, for example, there's 16% of the population is black. And so they've carved out so that there's like no counties that there's a black majority, so that they can't vote for essentially their representative. So you're seeing a lot of that now, and the court is looking at what rights the Voting Rights Act entails and what kind of the scope of it right now, and they've been peeling it back as the years go on.
Can you kind of walk us through where we're seeing these court challenges right now and what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so there's three primarily. So there's Arkansas, and that's the one that the Eighth Circuit just ruled, and what they ruled was that individuals don't have a private right of action. So if you want to sue on the Voting Rights Act, it has to be the Attorney General. So that means a number of the cases now, there were so many of them that were either private citizens or groups, special interest groups. Now it's only going to be the Attorney General in the Eighth Circuit. In the Fifth Circuit, though, they said you do have a private right of action. And then in Alabama, in June, the Supreme Court reaffirmed some of those rights to protect against racial gerrymandering. So it's been all over the board. So people are saying that this is really setting up the Supreme Court to hear these cases and decide, do we have a private right of action? And the majority of courts are saying, yes, we do, but this Eighth Circuit just recently said no.
So it sounds like, yes, you do think the Supreme Court is going to hear these?
Yes, I think the court will hear it because, and this is a classic, for the viewers who are up right now, this is a good sort of, teachable moment, because the Supreme Court doesn't hear every case that is brought before it. People file a writ and the court either accepts it or denies it. One of the reasons it accepts a case is when you have what's called a split in the circuits. So if the Eighth Circuit says you don't have a private right of action, the Fifth Circuit says you do have a private right of action, and so it's different things in different places. The Supreme Court will take the case, and when it makes its ruling, that governs everyone. But everybody knows that Chief Justice Roberts isn't a fan of the Voting Rights Act. Gorsuch and Thomas have both sort of suggested that there's no private right. So the concern is that if the Supreme Court hears it, that they're going to peel back some of these rights, and then we're going to have to look to Congress to sort of fill those rights back in.
That kind of leads us into our last question. I was like, if that is the case down the line, I mean, what actions or next steps do the plaintiffs take? Right.
So if they lose on the voting rights situation, then some people are looking at other legislation like 1983, which is federal legislation. It's a Section 1983 claim, which says you're violating our rights and you're acting under color of state law. So it's a different way of approaching it. But this is why recently the issue has come before Congress, and it really is a sort of state and federal thing. The states are saying, let us do things the way we want, even if we're violating people's rights, and the other folks are saying, well, the federal government needs to come in. This is why we passed the Voting Rights Act way back in 1965, was because even though we had the 14th and 15th Amendment, black people in particular, were being kept out of the vote. And so it's kind of this rub between the state and the federal government. So the Supreme Court should weigh in on it.
Yeah, it is. It's complicated, but has such an enormous impact. So thank you for breaking it down. We really appreciate it.